We had moved to a new house where my father, in developing the barren garden, cast up his own concrete paving stones, one per day. The mould was a regular hexagon, which, as we all know, is the shape of each cell in the honeycomb of a bee's hive. Just as probable in nature is the pentagon with its 5 sides, but a regular pentagon cannot tile a surface, as we say, while equilateral triangles, squares, and regular hexagons will cover a surface without leaving any gaps. By the time I went to university to study architecture, I had such an intuitive comprehension of trigonometry, Euclidean plane and solid geometry, that I wonder why I didn't spend my time designing buildings that were a toy town combination of simple volumes, cubes, spheres, cylinders, cones, etc., to whatever design problem there was to be drawn. Many years later now, I in fact believe geometry is fundamental to each and every act of synthesis, whether it be man-made or in nature itself, at the cellular level and in an entire organism. Pre-modernist buildings were the result of a 3-way conversation between geometry, decoration, and craftsmanship. But with modernism, decoration disappeared. All buildings with a conviction of their public worth were enriched in some way by decoration. It was inconceivable to build as we do today with no hint of decoration. The decoration was integral with the structure, often a modulation of the structural material, returning like fractals to the geometry of the whole edifice. There are all sorts of commentaries for why decoration no longer happens in buildings. But where there is less argument is when decoration was abandoned. The 19th century is sometimes presented to students of architecture as an aesthetic battle, a battle of styles between the neo-Gothic and the neo-classic. Both styles were being used during the rapid expansion of towns as people moved off the land following the work. There was, therefore, no shortage of labour to train up and provide first-class craftsmen. Buildings were technically well built, still using tried and tested construction techniques with masonry walls and timber beams. Iron is almost a symbol of the Industrial Revolution, but its acceptance by the building industry was not overly enthusiastic compared to its use for machinery and then the railways. The early and extraordinarily elegant cast-iron structures that did appear were part of the need to build large, open factory floors for housing machines. All of them included decoration in the castings, even if it was as modest as a Doric column base and capital. The technical and industrial revolutions were bringing with them social and cultural change, with accusations of decadence in society, as well as political analyses which led to the proposition of communism to more fairly share the wealth created by mechanization. This mixed bag of tensions exploded with the Great War, and that, quite simply, was when decoration disappeared. The mechanization that made the war so terrible was already in service for mass-producing building components, undermining and modifying the economy of handmade buildings and craft training. Reinforced concrete, a fledgling technology at the end of the 19th century, had its coming of age immediately after the war. There is no reason why reinforced concrete cannot be used to integrate decoration. It has to be held in a mould while it sets, just like cast iron or chocolate, so it can be any form you choose. Frank Lloyd Wright exploited this, perhaps ironically, with the Unity Temple in Oak Park, Illinois, where all 4 decorated reinforced concrete facades use the same mould. For the philosophers of the period, however, decoration was no longer considered necessary. Some even called it immoral. It was my interest in geometry, not decoration, that convinced me to study architecture. All design buildings contain geometry simply because they are documented prior to construction. It is impossible to draw unconsciously, and consciousness makes you see the geometry as you draw. That doesn't mean that the geometry is explicit in the final design. Perhaps paradoxically, computer-aided design now allows designs to be drawn without a need to know the implicit geometry either. A good example of geometry used explicitly is the idealized mosque. This is a semicircular dome sitting on a cube. It was copied directly from Byzantine Christian practice at the time of the emergence of Islam. The Western Christianity church building evolved as a basilica, a hall, while Eastern Christianity buildings evolved with subdivided spaces and multiple domes. The mosque form has remained essentially unchanged with its simple, explicit geometry. There was an unhealthy concentration on the plan of a building when I undertook my formal architectural design studies. Even so, the work on the plan does rather underline what architecture is all about. Nobody can ever see the plan, yet if the plan doesn't work, the building doesn't work. If you have ever wondered just what there is inside an architect's head during a design process, it is an integrated model of an entire project: the plan, the form, the materials. It is a mental model in flux, and the skill, if it is there, is a selective analysis of parts by drawing, whose results feed back to inform other parts, so that when documentation emerges to enable construction, there is a cogency to the whole. There was no training in decoration whatever. The only details that we learned were technical details, which don't actually train you to see. Before architects were on the menu, decoration was never conceived in detail at the outset of a project. Craftsmen were relied upon to develop a broad idea for the client. Architects at the beginning of the 19th century would simply show a rectangle on the drawing for the facade of a building, knowing that the joiner was capable of making a timber sliding sash window to the dimensions required. And so it was with decoration. The craftsmen were the subcontractors of the day, with the important distinction that they could also draw. In any case, every job was a modification of the previous job. Nobody was trying to reinvent the wheel. We are now at the point where decoration in buildings has been eschewed for so long that the best we seem able to do is commission a decorative piece from an artist as an appended gesture. This leaves us looking backwards, studying and admiring the handmade environments of our ancestors, as though their needs were different to ours.